Hello everyone, and welcome to this episode from the series of videos from the RICS Tech Partner Program. My name is Andrew Knight. I've been with RICS for over 10 years now, and I work within the directorate that looks at standards, regulation and thought leadership. And I have a global role to look at the whole implications of data and tech right across the built and natural environment. RICS has over 130,000 members working worldwide across all different asset types, right across the property life cycle. And I'm very pleased today to be speaking to Joe Morris and Rob Maxwell from Locale. So please do join me, Joe and Rob.
Hi.
Hi, Andrew.
Hello to you both. Hi, Rob. Hi, Joe. Well, it's great to have you on today, and it's a slightly formulaic piece that I always ask at the beginning of these videos. There's a bit of an introduction from yourselves in terms of who you are, who Locale is, and always particularly interesting to hear about a bit about your backstories and what's brought you from, in terms of experience and skills to being involved in the sort of property technology world. So, over to you, perhaps, Joe. Give us a bit of your backstory and which piece of Locale do you work with?
Well, I'm the Business Development Director at Locale Look, which is the newest service that Locale have introduced into their Proptech offering. And what we do is we create and deliver dynamic visual communications channels, which are displayed on digital signage, which is about enlivening and creating transparent communications between, in this case, building management teams and their occupiers. So it gives them the opportunity to promote all of the facilities and amenities that are going on within a building, as well as talk about initiatives around ESG, and to very much promote the buildings, which I think in this very competitive world that we're now living in is something that's very much required.
Indeed. Thanks, Joe. Rob.
Hi, Andrew. Yeah, so I'm the Senior Sales Manager for Locale. Locale, the element that I look after is the bit that looks around the digital communication for a building, so the digital engagement elements as well as the property management elements that are required for both building managers and other stakeholders as well. I've come from probably about 20 years background in residential sales. I was an estate agent for many a year, and I've made the leap across into the digital world probably about nearly 4 years ago now.
Okay.
When I joined Locale.
That's great. Well,
Yeah.
I was going to say, I've been, as I mentioned in my intro, at RICS over the last 10 years, and I think, prior to COVID, I'm sure, as you know better than I do, there's been this real acceleration in sort of active asset management, shorter leases, putting people at the center of real estate. So I suppose it's an oversimplification to say there's been a huge amount of change, but could you summarize for me what you've seen in the last, not just during COVID, but prior to that, in terms of the changes in terms of property management and engagement, and as you were saying, Joe, that sense of having to promote the building to draw people in, to make them aware of the services that are available?
Very much. I used to work for a very large commercial property company, who will remain nameless. And when I worked there, it was very much about the rent roll. It was very much about keeping the lights on, and just essentially sort of collecting the rents. There wasn't that much problem with regard to vacant space. There always seemed to be tenants who wanted to take space. But yeah, it was very much about the facilities management type of service. There wasn't much thought going on around what those customers, they weren't referred to as customers, it was always about tenants. So sort of harking back to those whole sort of medieval terms of landlord and tenant, and that it was quite interesting, because where I originally came from was actually a media advertising background in TV, where there's obviously a big focus on understanding your customers, and understanding who they are, what they want, how they behave, and how you can actually deliver that to them. And there was a complete lack of that at that time. But we've seen that change, haven't we, Rob, over the last few years?
Huge amount. I mean, obviously coming from a background where it's always been about the customer, to come into an industry where even as 4 years isn't that long, but even 4 years ago, it seemed that the focus was on the building management, what the building management teams wanted of the building, or the asset management teams wanted of that building. And I'm sure there was some discussion with the occupiers, customers, tenants, depending on what stage of the journey they were and their terminology with it was about. But I think what I've seen, I'd say more so in the last 18 months, 2 years, is how much closer building management teams want to get to their customers and understand those customers more, or is perceived that's what's wanted, that they want to understand that customer journey. And actually, where the customer didn't have that voice before, really is starting to receive the attention of these people, because customer is always king, but it's surprising how the customer's role has changed. A lot of businesses used to look at the customer as being that managing agent, where it's now the end user of the product that we provide. So I think Locale, that's kind of where we're shifting our focus as well. We want to ensure the building management team have got all the tools in place to help their customers, but we can't help their customers unless we know what their customers are looking for. And yes, building management teams can tell us, but it's also great that we now get the opportunity to speak directly to them.
Yeah, as you say, I mean, that sort of whole move towards shorter leases has obviously made, and I'll use the feudal term, landlords think much more closely. I think that the success of their ability to reduce voids and get market rent is around having high quality space, isn't it? And that actually, for better or for worse, and once again it will be an unnamed person, but I remember somebody saying 3 years ago that witnessing the death of the 25-year full repairing lease, that they were looking at these shorter leases, much more potential churn in that way, many more breaks, and the fact that actually real estate had to perform in a different way, and indeed the success of an asset owner was much more tied to the success of the occupier now. And as you say, also, I think hopefully the actual corporate occupiers thinking more closely what the employees want out of the building.
I think
they're the
very
ultimate
much
customer,
so.
aren't they?
Yeah, I think the whole model's changing, isn't it, Andrew? I mean, the 25-year lease was all wrapped up in the valuation of the property itself. So that was all part of what was driving the valuation as well as the rent itself. And now landlords, property owners, asset owners, call them what you will, have got to start thinking about things in a completely different way. And I think we're at a bit of a crossroads at the moment, aren't we, in terms of how the valuation of those properties are actually going to work through. And a lot of the debate is around how all of this customer experience is going to translate into a valuation. And I think that's where we are at the moment. There's still quite a lot of debate around that, and it's actually how that becomes a defined part of that equation.
Well, as you say, I think we're kind of in a sense where the market's moving, isn't it? I mean, Rob, you were about to say.
So do you not think, obviously, if you were to take the old model versus what is becoming the more norm, should we call it, the old model where you'd value a building, you could say this tenant's got 25-year lease with this tenant, so they're locked in and can't go anywhere. Is that more valuable than saying, here is a building where I've had an occupier in there for 25 years, they've been on a 5-year lease and continue to stay here because they want to be here? What type of customer is easier to manage in the long run? The type of customer that wants to stay, that has to stay in a building because a piece of paper says they must do, or that person that really recognises, this is where I want to be, my employees are happy here. We found a great spot, we've got a really nice environment, the community is good within the building, we know the local retailers, we've got everything on our doorstep, we have only got a 5-year lease with them, we've got no intentions of going anywhere. Which of those two is a more valuable asset if an asset owner is looking to sell one?
Well, exactly, yeah, and as you say, it's about understanding, even though they might have the option to break, the behaviour is showing that they're not, or indeed that you're commanding a rent that's very respectable, if I can use that phrase, compared to other buildings that perhaps aren't attractive. Because I think ultimately there's always a danger that there's a perception that you do all these good things just because they're good things, but they will also provide value, arguably. You know, if it's a building that people want to occupy, that the employees want to go to, that they value, and particularly I think post-COVID, where we are having to actively attract people into city centres to get them back in to want to go to a safe, productive, stimulating building, that's undoubtedly going to flow through to value, isn't it? Because yes, you'll be looking at a more complex model of people not executing breaks and not being tied into 25 years. But as we know, with a 25-year lease, doesn't stop people potentially subletting into the grey market. And you know, you may not really be, you may be kidding of yourself if you think your head lease is actually really there. It may be all grey space. So I mean,
Yeah.
I think it nicely as well, doesn't it, from the commercial market into the residential market, which we also work within as well. We're talking about this from an asset owner, from a large or a building with a central location, but it feeds right through to the residential world as well. And again, the same stories are there. The resident, the homeowner, didn't necessarily have much of a voice when it came to the management of these buildings. It was, here is your service charge, this is how much it is for the year, get on and pay it. What's it for? Never you mind what you pay, what it's for. It's what keeps the lights on in the hallway and keeps the grass cut. That's all you need to know. And even I look after quite a lot of the residential sector within Locale. And the customer, the end user, the resident, the homeowner, even the subtenant, the tenant that's renting that apartment from the owner, now has a voice, and they expect value for money, and they want that engagement with the community. And again, that's got to be good for driving up those revenues as well. Again, if you're in an apartment building where there's a really good community feel, everything's communicated well, you feel faults are being fixed, they do happen, but when faults are fixed, they're communicated out well and done efficiently, or the building next door that's not having any of this, that's got to be a good, valuable asset, even for that individual homeowner or occupier or tenant, whatever. That's going to definitely push up premiums there as well.
Yeah,
Indeed.
and I think, you know, some of the conversations that I've been having with people of late, and actually going on site to commercial buildings, the lockdown has provided them with a really good opportunity to actually start rethinking what facilities and amenities they've got within the building. And a lot of them have been incredibly busy converting basements into fabulous cycle facilities, for example, with showers and changing rooms. And I think that's a really key thing as well, because I think although the cycling thing was starting to gain a bit of momentum prior to COVID, I think, you know, the public transport effect is really going to be part of the thinking behind people coming back to offices as well. So if people can avoid public transport and actually use cycling facilities to get in, I think they will. So immediately, you know, as a building, you're starting to create something that's much more attractive than a building where you have no choice. And it's been really interesting to see that. And I think, you know, one of the things that the building management team need to start thinking about is how they promote and basically advertise the fact that they have all of these fantastic facilities. Because they've got to make a point of difference from one building to another, because there is vacant space out there. There is voided.
Exactly. Yeah. So I mean, in that sense, how are you helping? Because clearly, you know, the voice of that ultimate customer, the person who has to be either persuaded or actively wants to come into that building. Now, how do you help that customer voice be heard? Because I was interested by your comment about having worked in a different sector. I in a previous life worked with somebody who did a lot of consultancy with, you know, the big FMCG, and she used the phrase walking in the shoes of the customer. You know, you had to literally, and I know from FMCG, those firms, they would literally follow people around the supermarkets to see how they shopped, and literally would put themselves in the shoes of the customer. So is that what you're trying to almost recreate, that really true voice from the ultimate end user of the properties?
I think that's starting to happen, Andrew. You know, I think we're moving away from the build and they will come attitude, which was very much prevalent previously. And it's about, you know, creating buildings, which is obviously much more is much easier if you're starting from scratch. And obviously there are lots of lovely new shiny buildings that are being developed in London and in some of our regional cities as well. It's just much more purpose-built opportunities there. But I think, you know, asset owners are having to think about that with the other types of buildings as well, and the secondary and tertiary type, where there is an expectation, and clearly occupiers will vote with their feet. There's a lot of space out there. There's a lot of competition, and it seems as if there is a lot of movement in terms of uptake of space. But it's all tending to be in the grade A space, which is then obviously leaving the other space available. So asset owners are going to have to think very long and hard about what they're going to do to utilise that space, and how they're going to attract occupiers to that. We can't all be at 22 Bishopsgate.
I was about to say, I wasn't going to name that, but you're right. That's that sort of extreme example in a good sense, where, as you say, brand new, all those kind of facilities, and particularly also that interesting mix of kind of quasi-public space with private as well, which I guess is an interesting model that once again has that key issue of customer feedback and attracting people into the space. But you're right, that and we see it in the ESG as well, don't we, that huge challenge that the bulk of the housing stock is not new. It's a retrofit issue rather than just being focused on, dare I say it, shiny new buildings in a central business district. How do we make sure these kind of changes do flow down, as you say, to secondary and tertiary, and that there are sometimes things that aren't necessarily hugely expensive but just innovative that just make that space more attractive and more usable?
I think that expense bit's a really useful bit to pick up on there, Andrew, because I think grade A buildings, are obviously going to have lots of fantastic top of the range tech in the buildings. But the customers that they had that left 18 months ago aren't the same customers that are returning 18 months later. That's a huge mind shift that everyone's been through in the last 18 months. And I think it really starts with the asset owners, the asset management companies, the building management companies, the front of house teams of these buildings, if they have them, really getting an understanding of who their customer is now. And it's very easy to do in a new building because everyone's a new customer that walks through the door. But I think we're at a stage now where there is the golden opportunity of looking at every customer that's returning back to a building as a new customer, because they are different. These preconceived ideas about how they may have used the space 18 months ago, Joe made a very good point. I wonder how many people 18 months ago would have even considered cycling into work in the morning rather than the tube. Now it might be a preferred travel option that, like I said, they wouldn't have thought about, and they're now thinking, I can't do it, because they haven't had the facilities put in place, because the building management teams and the asset owners don't know. So going back to your original question, what are we doing about that at the moment? That's where the occupier engagement element of Locale is really kicking in for us now, I think, and really start to pick up pace. It's a shame that Laura from our Locale Live team couldn't be here today to run you through that, but it's their main element within the Locale group is to go and listen to those end customers. What do they want from their buildings? How could they be made to feel safe in their building? How can a 12-month plan affect their way of living within that building? Because let's face it, these people are in buildings for quite some time of the day. It's a second home. So what do they want? How do they do it? We'll go out, ask them those questions, put together a plan, almost like a deployment plan, say over a 12-month period, for the building management teams to implement. Of course, our tech will be used for some of it, but not all of it, as that's the beauty of the Locale group, is you don't need to have every element in the building. That's why we're trying to take a real 360 approach to this. Not every building is going to need to have the digital platform and mobile. It might require the Locale Look service that Joe's team provide, or just those begin with those insights to what that occupier is wanting when they first go back. And I think that's the stage where the successful building management companies are starting to figure this, are starting to see this, and really trying to put a plan in place around that.
I think that's absolutely right, Rob, as well, and I think the building management teams and the management agencies that are really thinking through this are understanding what they can achieve by bringing tech into the building, and they have very clear KPIs, and they have very clear aspirations as to how they're going to engage with the tech and what they want to get out of it. There is still quite a lot of box ticking. People bringing tech into their sites and then wondering why it doesn't work, because they don't actually engage with it themselves. You know, there's always this perception that somehow or other you bring in tech, you sign up for it, you pay for it, and somehow or other, without any intervention whatsoever, it changes everything for you. And I think, you know, there is still quite a lot of thought process for people to get behind, thinking they have to engage as well, and they have to be very clear about why they want the tech and what they're going to do with it, and then we can provide the solutions for them.
No, that's a good point. And sorry, Rob, do carry on.
The change management piece, I think, is the biggest part of this. They can sit down, we can identify the challenges they may be having with a building or with particular occupiers, or occupiers noticing the challenges. We can provide them with the solutions to those challenges, but there's a huge change management piece in there as well. And we're seeing that shift, particularly in the commercial and residential management, building management elements, where they're bringing in more hospitality experienced team members to assist with that. It's that element that I think that is the tricky bit, getting that change management. You're going to have some building managers that might be in the same building for 20 years and it's been working fine and nothing's ever gone wrong and it's all great and wonderful. And then you'll have some that might move around every 2 or 3 years, and that change is really good because you start picking up the best bits from different buildings and start implementing in different places. And I think that's kind of what I can see happening a lot more as well. It's just that rise, as we call it, the rise of hotelisation within these buildings.
I mean, is some of that a reflection? Sorry, Joe. Some of that a reflection of the kind of multifamily approach that's come across from the States, that kind of front of house, that as you say, hotelisation, that sort of, you know, thinking that this actually is a, you know, it is much more of a, you know, a service that is being provided rather than just bricks and mortar. Do you think that's part of it, or have we invented our own version of that in the UK?
Well, I'd like to think we've invented our own version of it. The idea might have been sparked in the States, but I like to think that we sort of adapt it to our own purposes. And I think, yeah, that whole concierge concept is very much at play. And that's where the tech can really help as well, because it can create efficiencies around what's going on with the general running of a building. Which then frees people up to actually do that front of house thing in a completely different way. I heard somebody talk about it as a white glove service, and which I just thought was quite interesting. But you understand what they're talking about. It's actually about having that warm welcome coming into the building, feeling part of what's going on in the building. It's not just a workplace, it's actually somewhere where you spend a lot of time, you feel very comfortable. There's lots of breakout areas now, lots of business lounges. So it has, even when you walk into reception areas now, it has a very different feel to the way that it would have felt sort of 4 or 5 years ago, with very austere, bare, you know, marble type entrances. It's all about feeling now that you're not just an employee walking into the building where you work. You are part of what's going on, and with lots of clubs and societies and different things to get involved in, creating that community inside the building. And also there's an awful lot around creating communities outside, as Rob was talking about. So whether that be engagement with charities or local retailers or things that are going on in the local area. So rather than just being a spaceship sort of that's been sort of parachuted into the space that it's encompassing, being, you know, part of what's going on beyond the walls of the building.
So we've talked so much about people, because this is all about people ultimately, both in terms of the end customers and you mentioned, Rob, in terms of the change management piece. But how does the tech come into play? You know, we're here talking about data and tech. When data and tech is appropriate, where are you using it, and what kind of tech are you putting in that delivers that value? As you say, it's not tech for tech's sake, it's the right kind of tech for the right kind of building, for the right kind of solution. But what tech are you deploying?
There's so many different types of it, because there's so many different challenges the building teams are looking at. I mean, one of my main jobs is to go and meet with the building manager and say, what challenges are you facing at the moment? And they'll sit there and say, well, we've got all these people coming and going from the building. We really need to keep a better track of them coming in and out of the building. It's a really time-consuming process of our occupiers having to email us. We've got someone coming at 3 or whatever. So, okay, we'll put our visitor management system in place. So if we can provide your occupier ticking the box, saving them some time in uploading their occupier or their visitors to the building for that week, do so, and communicate that direct communication between the two. So having elements like we mentioned, the visitor management module in place, simple things like being able to keep occupiers up to date or customers up to date with information about things that are going on inside the building, in the local community, and stuff that's relevant. I think that's the bit that, I mean, we all get tech, we all get information. In fact, we live in a world now where it is information overload. Everything's moving so fast that you have to particularly select what you're going to look at because you wouldn't have time to read everything. So having something like the Locale system in place where you know that the information that you're going to receive from your building management company, your building manager, your concierge team, if you receive an email from them through or a notification via the push by the mobile app, you'll find you're receiving information that is actually valid to you because they've done it that way. It's not just a case of, oh, we need to let the building know and throw it out to everybody. Who in the building needs to know this information and make sure they get it? So again, with the use of our tech, it gives you that ability to do so. Sending in clear communications to the right people at the right time is key anytime. It's an efficiency. And I'm sure Joe will mention it's not just about sending a message to someone's phone or to somebody laptop when they're at work. It's about making sure that message is there throughout their journey of the building, whether they're coming in the morning and they're saying the lovely Locale look screens with attractive, relevant content that's at the right time for them to be seeing it. There's no point seeing at 5 o'clock in the evening, for instance, getting a notification through on the portal to say, just to let you know, breakfast is being served in the Locale at 10 o'clock this morning. It's too late. Do you know what I mean? So getting that sort of timed, sensible messaging out to a building at the right time is what our tech is there to do. I mean, we could spend all day talking about the different elements because of the complex elements of a building and different communication elements and different sectors. We have to have a stable of
exactly.
We saw that. Residential buildings, for instance, the announcements are wonderful. Visitor management, well, I'll tell you when my mum's turning up. I don't need to let you know. Not so relevant. I would quite like to know when a parcel turns up for me. And that it has been received and that I have got it and there's a record of that. Or I'd really like to be able to leave that key behind concierge for my mum when she turns up before I come home from work that day, whatever. So those sorts of small pieces like that make a massive difference to busy people on the go all the time.
So have you seen, sorry Joe, you going to say?
Yeah, I was going to say, I think the relevance is absolutely key. You know, all buildings are completely different in terms of the way that they operate, but also the occupiers within them are completely different. So the way that you communicate with an office building that is full of financial people, lawyers, etc., which tend to be a bit more formal, and the way they like to sort of take on board messaging is completely different. So the way that you would design and what we do with Locale Look is we think about the tone and the way that a message might be portrayed. Because different people absorb messages in different ways. So, you know, it comes back to this understanding your audience. And so, you know, we work very closely with the building management teams to understand who those people actually are who are in there. Because, you know, if you're wanting to communicate with occupiers in a building in Shoreditch, for example, that's populated by a lot of media type people, you know, the sort of messaging, the way that you put that across is completely different to, as I say, a city building full of lawyers.
Exactly,
so you know that has to be thought about as well. It's not just about communication, and also you need to think about using different media for different messaging. And with Locale, we can do a complete through the line sort of communication from the start of the day through an occupier's journey in the workplace throughout the day, and as we all know, you need to get messaging across several times,
Yes.
multiple times, before
Repetition.
somebody actually takes on board what it is that you're
Yeah.
trying to say. So it gives the opportunity to do that in a dynamic and meaningful way.
I mean, back to another people question that I'm interested to hear your view on. I mean, if I think, excuse me, wind back over the years, you know, the team that would manage a building would classically be some people behind the scenes, you know, tapping the pipe work and making sure the lift's working, and then one lonely person on the front desk. Are you seeing the shape of the building management teams change in terms of the roles and the kind of balance of the kind of people they have working in those teams? Because what you're describing is as much a shift in almost the job roles for a building management team as it is for the tech and how you manage the occupiers.
Oh, very much so. I think you know, in bygone days, you're right. The building manager would very often come from the military, because you know, that those were the type of skills that were required. Now it's very much about people who have got experience of hotels and concierge type of roles. And you know, it doesn't take away from the fact, obviously, the building fabric and structure still needs to be looked after. But you know, with technology, efficiencies around how that management can happen means that it can free up time and space for people to take on these other roles as well. And yeah, that's very much the way that we're seeing things going, isn't it, Rob? I mean, both in residential and commercial.
I'm seeing a lot more from the front of house, that customer facing role. Those faces and people are changing. And like you mentioned, it's no longer ex-military person sitting behind the desk telling you your appointment's at 9 o'clock, sit over there, they'll be with you shortly. You have got, and I think management companies are recognizing as well that the pace is moving so quickly, they are moving with that change of management piece. But in the meantime, there are these concierge service companies out there that are employing specialists that are good with people first to carry out that front end role. I was with one of our large commercial clients the other week, and they were saying building brand through experience is the key. They're no longer they wanted to feel that when you walked into that building and you met that front of house team, that you knew who was managing that building, because it was the experience there, the same as their other buildings, but it was a memorable one. I mean, Joe and I were talking the other week about how often do you go into a building, or did you go into a building where you can remember what the guy or lady behind the counter was like when she sorted out Vista Pass or whatever. But now, when they're doing it, they'll have a chat with you. So who you see today? How's your day been going? It's a lot more of that interaction element. And they've got the time to do that because the tech that we can provide is freeing that up. No longer are they sitting there with the phone in one ear going, oh, just 1 minute, I'll be with you there in a minute, writing down the next meeting invite that comes up. Because they can book the meetings directly through the portal.
Yeah, and they're not having to fold up the paper for the badges and
No.
tear them off.
And actually, you know, there is a lot of move towards getting rid of the reception desks themselves, because they are a barrier. So, you know, people actually coming and meeting you as you come into the building. So it's much more about them coming to you as opposed to you going to them. It's sort of turning it all on its head, rather. And I think this whole idea of brand is really interesting. You know, that's what everybody else recognized years ago, that it's brand is about experience.
Well, it is,
And
as you say, that's ultimately that's what you remember about a brand, is what were they like when you phoned them up or you physically went to see them. Yes, it's about a product, but as you say, so much of it is about that surrounding piece, that if something goes wrong, how well was it dealt with, that sort of thing. As you say, it comes back to the human interaction almost, doesn't it? So
yes, and I think there's quite a I think previously people thought that tech would take away that personal element, but actually it's entirely the opposite. The tech allows the personal approach to really take over.
Yeah, I think that's an interesting thing. When we look at data and tech right across the built environment, there's obviously that kind of fear that it sort of takes away roles, or it changes things in a negative way. When, as you say, ultimately it frees up people to have more time to do the really valuable bits, which is be
Mm.
human beings and interact with each other, and not be taking notes, or whatever it is, some kind of, dare I say, quite menial task like folding up a badge or ripping a badge out of a manual book. As you say, it frees people up to actually do the things that are more human, because automation has taken some of those tasks away. I mean, it's always like the elephant in the room, isn't it, when we talk at the moment about anything to do with real estate. But, and I know you mentioned sort of those conversions of basements to sort of shower rooms and stuff, but what else are you seeing in terms of what property owners and occupiers are doing to, and I'll use the word entice, to encourage people to come back to the office? I mean, I've been working from home now for 18 months, and I must admit I don't feel particularly driven to go in the office yet. So what kind of strategies and techniques are people using now to make buildings attractive given the strange times that we're in?
Well, I think the building management teams are obviously talking to the occupiers and the office management people, and trying to understand what it is that will entice those people back.
Mm.
And I think the safe environment is absolutely key to that, and promoting all of that. I'll go back to what I said before. Things that are enlivening the entire building. The events that are taking place or will be taking place, that we can promote and support, and all of the things that create the community, and trying to encourage people sort of to take part in all of that. There's been a lot of talk about all of things that have been lost by people working from home and remotely, which is very much around culture and things like training, sharing of ideas, mentoring, all of those things that make such a vast difference to a business, that you could say is sort of quite intangible. So there are reasons why people should be back in the office, if not every day, then sort of
At least some, yeah.
At least some of it. And so I think the building management teams have been talking to all of their occupiers and trying to understand where they're at with that sort of thing.
Rob, what are you hearing?
There's a bit of a fear of missing out if you can get the communication piece right. If you can be communicating as a building management team to your occupiers, whether they're in the building or working from home, to let them know what's been going on that day. We work within an office environment. Joe's at home today. I'm in the office today. It will be flipped tomorrow. Nothing personal, Joe. It's just different ways of working.
It is personal.
So we can edit that bit out.
But what I'm trying to say is that there have been days when the office has been really full, and they've been days we've done a Locale bake-off, for instance. And the Locale bake-off, I was in for that day, and I've never seen so many people in the office since lockdown. Do you know what I mean? And we communicated that out. We involved people that weren't necessarily working that day from the office, but they could still be part and parcel of it, even though digitally. But I'm sure there was an element of them that thought, oh, I wish I'd been there for it. There's one thing looking at a cake, there's another thing tasting it. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
But communicating out little events like that happen in your building, there's no expense in there. The staff have brought the food in. They're the ones that do it amongst themselves. All you're doing is you're giving them a platform, a place to promote that's what's going on in a building. And therefore, I haven't seen them for ages. I might pop in tomorrow, and tomorrow turns into another day and another day. Before you know it, these people are coming back more regularly. So do things that your occupiers are interested in. Show them you're doing it and repeat it. Keep doing that. And the numbers will start to pick up when they start to see that people have generally got a reason and a want to come into the office.
I suppose what's interesting there is that we may be left with a new normal of a kind of almost a virtual workspace where there'll be some permanent issue of there'll always be certain numbers of people now at a higher level working from home. So that kind of comms piece should always be thinking, well, okay, we have to talk to the workforce, whether they're in the office or not, to say, look, this is what's going on. I know you don't, quote, have to go in the office today, but this is what's happening. You know, one of your colleagues is in that perhaps you haven't seen for some time, and kind of almost just spreading that word, as you say, almost that FOMO effect of I don't want to miss out on that, but realizing that now when you're managing a building and 20 home offices at the same time, or whatever that number might be, because actually your audience is always going to be that blend now of maybe whatever the split will be, 3 days at home, 2 days at work, whatever it be, but that you're talking to a kind of a virtual floor sometimes.
Having that simple communication piece just demonstrates again where tech hasn't replaced people's jobs, it's made it easier, because if they're communicating it digitally, because they've now got two audiences in 200 different geographical positions in one day, you can still send out the same information, keep people updated in the same way as if they were all within the building. So therefore, they technically are. They are getting that experience. They are getting that service element. So tech's not replacing. It's just encouraging and giving people that ability to go out and think a little bit further ahead of, I must get my health and safety report done tomorrow.
Yeah. Yeah, as you say, it is about efficiencies in that sense. Well, this has been fascinating, and there's a lot of things I'd like to revisit with you and your colleagues on future calls. But for the moment, thanks. It's been great. Really enjoyed chatting, Rob and Joe, and look forward to chatting to you soon again.
Thank you very much, Andrew. It's really interesting. Thank you.
Pleasure. Bye-bye now.